Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the council meeting of April the 9th, 2018. In case you can't find one, there is an American flag in both the front and the back of the room. If you would, please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge of the United States of America and to the republic one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Ms. Parker, would you take the roll, please?
Atchison.
Here.
Bird.
Here.
DeCambra.
Here.
DeMott.
Here.
Pinter.
Here.
Seitz.
Here.
Scully.
Here.
Okay. Members of council, on the agenda item number 3, we have the minutes of March the 22nd and the special meeting of April the 2nd. If I could get a motion at this time for the minutes. Ms. Pinter.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I move that the City Council approve the meetings of March 2018 and April 2nd, 2018 as presented.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion is carried. Ladies and gentlemen, kind of be patient with us. We have a number of these to get through, so we'll start with the Westminster Start by Believing proclamation. Ms. Seitz.
Thanks so much, Mr. Mayor. We're going to actually start with a video.
What would you say if someone you love told you they had been sexually assaulted? What we know is that the first time a survivor talks about their sexual assault, it is most often with a friend or family member. That may be you. Will you start by believing?
I start by believing because a victim shouldn't feel shame. Perpetrators should feel shame.
I start by believing because we pride ourselves on having a work environment that is free from harassment and discrimination.
I start by believing because it's the first critical step in getting survivors of sexual assault the services they need and holding offenders accountable for their behavior.
I start by believing because people deserve to have their story heard.
I start by believing because it matters and it's the right thing to do.
We start by believing because everyone is entitled to dignity and respect.
We are Ralston House, and we start by believing.
By providing a safe space for children to tell their stories of abuse.
I start by believing because the students, the staff, and the community in Westminster Public Schools deserve it.
I start by believing because we are teaching students at Westminster High School to respect themselves and each other.
We start by believing because now is the time to change a culture.
I start by believing because it helps survivors recover.
I start by believing a child when they tell their story of abuse, neglect, or exploitation.
I start by believing because Westminster Soccer cares about its student athletes and their families.
I start by believing because I want victims to know that they have a safe place to tell their story.
I start by believing because every survivor deserves the chance to heal, no matter how long it's been since the abuse happened.
I start by believing because at the City of Westminster, job one is the safety of our citizens and supporting those that have been harmed.
I start by believing because we need communities where, regardless of your gender, you have a chance to thrive, not just survive.
I start by believing because survivors matter and deserve a chance to heal.
We start believing because we know as a business community that when our customers, when our employees, when the people that we interact with every day have the courage to come forward and report an assault, that they deserve to be treated with respect and they deserve to be treated with dignity.
A safe and healthy community contributes to a better quality of life, a community where people want to live, work, and play. And that's why we start by believing.
I start by believing because nobody deserves to disappear.
I start by believing because change begins with me. I have the strength and the power to make the world a better place, and so do you.
Westminster is a community that starts by believing.
Can I have everyone who is part of Start by Believing that's coming to receive the proclamation please come forward? A lot more people here than Donna. What an impressive group of people that we have here today. As a city councilor, of course, I feel I live in a remarkable community. But it's not very often that I have so much proof all at one time. When we started talking about how do we as a community come together to work on this public safety issue, because sexual assault prevention really is a public safety issue, everybody responded. And it was unbelievable how quickly we had fit and alignment in what our vision for this campaign would be. So I really want to thank everybody that's here before us. And I know that we have a tight agenda tonight and a lot of proclamations, but I would like everybody to be able to, before I read the proclamation, introduce themselves and say what agency they're with. Why don't we start?
All right. My name is Donna Olengi, and I'm the chairperson for Start by Believing campaign.
I'm Rich Chamberlain, also on the committee, and on the Westminster Inclusivity Board, member of the Baha'i Faith, and husband and father.
My name is Melissa Henshin, and I'm with the Wings Foundation.
Juliette Abdeljawad, President and CEO of the Westminster Chamber of Commerce.
Carmen Carter with the Blue Bench. We're about putting an end to sexual assault through prevention and care.
Greg Moss with the Metro North Chamber of Commerce.
Christy Stearns, Front Range Community College. Drew Hogan, Westminster Police Department Victim Services.
Tracy Crowther, State Representative, House District 29.
Don Mosley, Ralston House Child Advocacy Center.
Rhoda Pilmer, Adams County District Attorney's Office.
Paul Mulvaney, Executive Director at Westminster Soccer.
I'm Dave Young. I'm the District Attorney for Adams and Broomfield counties. Adams County is the best part of Westminster.
I was about to say that I believe District Attorney Young had some remarks to make. Would you like to do that now?
That was my Sure. I appreciate this campaign very much. I've been a prosecutor now for about 26 years, and sexual assault cases are the most difficult cases that we have to deal with because we have to prove a case that something happened beyond a reasonable doubt to a member of 12 citizens that don't know each other. So we select them and we ask them to convict someone of a very, very serious crime of sexual assault. And the crime of sexual assault does not happen with witnesses. And so we're really relying on and we're believing what the victim of that sexual assault has to say. And not only are we believing what they have to say, we're asking 12 members of the community to believe what they have to say. Because again, we don't always have other corroborating evidence. So this is a tremendous campaign for many reasons. If we get one victim or one survivor of sexual assault to come forward and report it because they heard about this campaign, then it's a success in my mind. So thank you very much for bringing this to the community, and we're doing the best we can to put a stop to sexual assault.
With that, I'm going to read the proclamation. Whereas the City of Westminster recognizes that the all too common crimes of sexual violence affect countless members of our community across every age, gender, race, religion, sexual orientation, and socioeconomic status. And whereas in Colorado, 1 in 2 women and 1 in 4 men have experienced sexually violent crimes, survivors of these acts of power and control deserve support on their path towards healing and justice. And whereas the first disclosure is critical in a survivor's decision to seek healing and justice after a sexual assault. Research shows that survivors most commonly disclose their sexual assault to a friend or family member first. When these loved ones respond with doubt, shame, or blame, survivors suffer additional negative effects on their physical and psychological well-being. When friends and families start by believing, the survivor experiences fewer traumatic impacts and is more likely to seek resources for healing and justice. And whereas the Start by Believing Public Awareness Campaign, a program of End Violence Against Women International, is designed to improve the responses of friends, family members, and community professionals so they can help survivors to understand their options for healing and justice, whether that is counseling, medical care, or reporting to law enforcement. And whereas Westminster is a Start by Believing community and has the power to support survivors when they disclose a sexual assault by conveying, "I believe you, and this was not your fault. How can I help?" Now, therefore, I, Herb Atchison, Mayor of the City of Westminster, on behalf of the entire City Council and staff, do hereby proclaim the City of Westminster to be a Start by Believing community. I call upon the people of Westminster to start by believing when their friends and family come forward to disclose sexual assault. Learn more about this community campaign at www.westybelieves.org. Thank you guys so much. Absolutely.
Except for you, you need to.
I'll squeeze in behind you.
Yeah, right.
Okay, this is with Greg's spelling here, so. Don't let me fall over. Great. I think everybody eyes are open.
Okay, before anybody moves, I'm going to try to grab one over here too.
Okay.
So just do that quick little pro.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay, I'm going to take a couple. Count to 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, we'll see you next Wednesday.
Thank you.
Ms. Scully, would please our next one.
Come on up, Ray and Kaylin. All right, I have the distinct honor tonight of doing the proclamation for Day Without Hate. And I've been a privileged parent. I'm a Jefferson County school parent, and my children have celebrated Day Without Hate for the last 14 years. Hard to believe I'm that old, but it is true. No, my oldest is in college, and you know. So 14 years. This day means so much to us in Jefferson County and now throughout Denver and across the nation, and it's going international. This day is a day to celebrate peace and no bullying and practicing safety in a way that is positive in a different way. So. And to not hate, which is the most important part. Day Without Hate was a response to the Virginia Tech shootings. It was started by Stanley Lake High School. It's now carried out by the county council for the youth in Jefferson County. And Kalen is on that council, and he represents Stanley Lake in that council. Do you want to say a few words before we start?
Just want to say that it's really important to celebrate this and to just stop bullying everyone. And now it's even an international event.
Yes. And when do we wear our white t-shirts?
This year it's on April 27th, and it's the last Friday of April.
And everyone should wear your white t-shirt, get all your coworkers to wear a white t-shirt or any white shirt. Take a picture and post it to your social media accounts, Twitter, Facebook, and spread the word Day Without Hate, a day of practicing positive kindness to all of our friends. All right. Whereas in May 2007, a small committee of Stanley Lake High School students and teachers formed the first Day Without Hate. Their goal was to draw attention and promote nonviolence, respect, and unity within our schools. And whereas today tens of thousands of students and community members across Jefferson County, the state of Colorado, and the nation participate in Day Without Hate as a celebration of unity, a rejection of fear, and a commitment to work toward nonviolent solutions to any conflict in our schools. And whereas we as a community are responsible for cultivating an atmosphere of tolerance among our diverse populations, and whereas by publicly acknowledging and celebrating Day Without Hate, the City of Westminster makes a stand with our schools to reject fear and violence and work toward embracing our differences and promoting an inclusive, safe, and harmonious environment for all of our residents. Now, therefore, I, Herb Atchison, Mayor of the City of Westminster, Colorado, on behalf of the entire City Council and staff, do hereby proclaim Friday, April 27th, 2018 to be a day without hate, and commend the sound concept of promoting awareness of nonviolence, respect, and unity within our educational system and our community. Signed this day, 9th of April, 2018, Herb Atchison. So this is for you to take back to your council and to your school. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ray, it was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. And do you want to take a picture? All right.
Take 2 pictures. You count to 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
Excellent.
Thank
Very
you.
nice job.
Ms. Berg, would you take our next one, please?
So I'm going to ask Debbie Teeter to come up front with me and find our proclamation. So I did provide a video. Did we have the video? No, we were able to play a video. I sent a video. I have a video on here, but you can't load it. Okay. So, so yes, go ahead. I'll let you start. Yes.
So I'm Debbie Teeter. I'm a resident of the City of Westminster, and I'm also marketing chair on the National Auto Body Council. And I know all of you drive cars, and you've probably wrecked your cars, and I can tell you a lot more about proper way to fix your car so that you don't get in another wreck and which places to go and which ones not to. But that's really not why I'm here. I'm here to promote. You can ask me questions later because I had Dawn going, really? Really? But I'm here to promote 3 initiatives that we do. Actually, tonight, just 1 initiative, and that is distracted driving. April is Distracted Driving Month, and the reason that we choose April is it is prior to summer in the 100 deadliest days of summer when teenagers are driving. And most of our programming is geared towards teenagers in high schools where we go in and we teach them about the dangers of distracted driving. There is an It Can Wait video by AT&T. You will definitely be crying by the end of that video. Several others out there on the effects of what happens when people are texting or being distracted while driving. And it's not just texting. There's a lot of things that distract you while driving. And what can happen in that short time. You can try it at home. Try to text and keep 3 balloons up in the air and see how successful you are. Because we cannot multitask. We change channels. When we try to do everything at once, it doesn't work. You're not paying attention. So I do want to ask you a few questions, and then we'll go on. This will be real quick. So I don't know if you want to call yourself out. Any council members willing to do this? Have you ever used your smartphone while driving? Keep your smartphone within easy reach while driving. Nobody's really ready to put that hand up and tell us. Use social media behind the wheel. Anybody out there? Take pictures or watch a video. I saw 2 girls driving down the road while one was filming, the other was hanging out the car, and the other was texting away. None of them were watching what was going on. I was so amazed they didn't just wreck right there. 7 in 10 people engage in smartphone activities while driving. 62% keep their smartphone within easy reach while driving. Nearly 4 in 10 use social media while driving. 17% snap a photo or a selfie, and 12% shoot a video, and 10% video chat. So in the time it takes to look at a text, you've driven a full football field. So imagine what can happen in that time. So I gave this to Shannon to try. Anyone's welcome to try it if they would like, but we can't have everyone do it. Let's see if you can. Okay, so there's some crosshairs in it. Just line it up with the play.
And so maybe while Maria's doing that, we can go to do you have additional statistics
Hold on, I'm
you
just
want to share?
going to say.
Sure.
So you can change this. Find the top 5 people in your list and tell them, do not text me, do not call me when I'm driving. Put your smartphones, all have different types of apps on them that will shut your phone down. Use those. Put your phone in the trunk of your car. Because the time that it takes, what it does to people, if something happened to you in a wreck, if you hurt someone else in a wreck, it's going to completely change your life. Saying I'm on my way, order a pizza with pepperoni on it, that's not going to change your life. That's just senseless. So I'm asking everyone to please put your phone away. Let's quit texting while driving, quit having it within earshot, pay attention to what's in front of you, save a life.
Right. Yeah, they're very important statistics. Thank you for sharing that. And so we are honoring this National Distracted Driving Month and with a proclamation. So whereas distracted driving is any activity that could divert a person's attention from the primary task of driving and endanger driver, passenger, pedestrian, and other road user safety, and whereas studies show that texting while driving involves manual, visual, and mental distraction and is among the worst of all driver distractions. And whereas distracted driving is an ever-growing issue among drivers of all ages, and many teens and adults have formed habits of using their cell phones while driving despite understanding the risk. And whereas the It Can Wait campaign partners with local organizations to help educate drivers of all ages on the dangers of distracted driving and encourages them to personally pledge not to use their phones while driving. And whereas the City of Westminster fully supports the initiatives of the It Can Wait campaign and their efforts to help stop distracted driving. Now therefore, I, Herb Atchison, Mayor of the City of Westminster, on behalf of the entire City Council and staff, do hereby proclaim the month of April Distracted Driving Awareness Month, and call upon the people of Westminster to pledge not to use their phone while driving in an effort to keep themselves and others that share the road safe. Signed this 9th day of April 2018. Thank you very much.
Take 2 photos, count to 3 both times. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. And then one last thing, take the pledge, text NABC to 50555. Don't do it while you're driving.
Right, yes. That's exactly right. Okay, thank you.
I don't know if we could get it to work. Thank you.
Thanks, Deb. Okay, Ms. Pinter, if you'll take our next one, please.
So this is for volunteer, keeps twitching at me, National Volunteer Week proclamation.
And if we could have all the volunteers.
Oh, in Westminster, that's a lot of people.
We have a lot. Yeah.
I know these amazing people are going to have all of the data, so I will just say that as you all are coming up here, that we, City Council, are incredibly grateful that it seems that on average that the volunteers in our city do service that equals somewhere between $800,000 and $1 million annually. Really wonderful work, and we have a tradition of everyone introducing themselves. And so while we do that, if you could start over here and say your name and then which departments you volunteer for.
Bonnie Carrera for the K-9 unit.
Stacy and Davis Galata, we do snowbusters and open space cleanup, and Davis is on the board for the Parks and Rec.
Harley Armstrong, Finance.
Don Brundage Rotary Club, that does the cooking and other volunteer work.
David Goss, Irving Street Library English teacher.
Don Fittis, Environmental Advisory Board.
Kim Putney, Irving Street Library.
Jill Todd, the jobs program at the library.
Ruth Gaitan, Irving Street Library, Speak English program.
Emily Littlejohn, volunteer coordinator.
Vicki Dietschel, victims advocate, Westminster Police Department Victim Services.
Denise Sandusky, victim advocate.
Barbara Klatt, Westminster PD Records.
Rich Chamberlain, Inclusivity Board.
Christy Patrick, Westminster Police Department Victim Services Victim Advocate.
Sue Daswich, Westminster Police Victim Advocate. Candy Epperson, Volunteer Victim Advocate.
Kelly Otten, Volunteer Victim Advocate.
Robert DeLong, Jefferson County Community Corrections Board.
Linda Allison, Environmental Advisory Board.
So my name is Dee Martin, and I'm the Human Resources Director, and I want to introduce Marina Miller. Yes. I wanted to introduce Marina Miller. She has been our coordinator for a volunteer program for 5 years, since April. I see we have a few other volunteer supporters in our audience as well. Emily Littlejohn has graciously taken over that responsibility. Marina is transitioning to other responsibilities, and Emily will be taking over. And we just can't say enough about the contribution of our volunteers in our organization. Kate is nodding as well. They do so much for this organization, and it really is countless hours, thousands, millions of dollars every year contributed to our organization through volunteer work. And it really is a way that people can engage in their community at a very grassroots level and make such a difference in their community. So we can't say enough. Thank you for our volunteers. Lisa is overall responsible for the volunteer program, and we just can't say thank you enough.
All right. So I asked everyone to take the opportunity to say which department, because what really surprised me the more I learned about our volunteers is they lend incredible professional expertise. You could be a novice like myself and just come out May 12th and clean up some parks and trails, and that's needed too. But we have some really wonderful professionals and highly trained people, such as our victims advocates, who spend countless hours not only in service, but in training themselves to better serve our community. And I don't think we could be more grateful. So thank you very much to everyone, no matter how you contribute. This is our proclamation. Whereas the entire community can inspire, equip, and mobilize people to take action that changes the world, and whereas volunteers can connect with local community service opportunities through hundreds of community service organizations, and whereas individuals and communities are at the center of social change, discovering their power to make a difference, and whereas during this week all over the nation, service projects will be performed and volunteers recognized for their commitment to serve, and whereas the giving of oneself in service to another empowers the giver and the recipient, and whereas experience teaches us that government by itself cannot solve all of our nation's social problems, and whereas our country's volunteer force of more than 60 million is a great treasure, and whereas volunteers are vital to our future as a caring, productive nation. Now, therefore, I, Herb Atchison, Mayor of the City of Westminster, do on behalf of the entire City Council hereby proclaim the week of April 15th through 21st, 2018, City of Westminster National Volunteer Week, and urge my fellow citizens to volunteer in their respective communities. By volunteering and recognizing those who serve, we can come together to make a difference. Signed this 9th of April. Thank you. Congratulations. We get to take a picture. Oh, wow. Should we scoot forward?
Make use of the back there.
Excuse me.
Oh, do you mean
I don't want to discriminate based on
Look, you're right there?
I love yours.
Oh my gosh, is that a bench? Cancer survivor. Cancer survivor.
Have you done this before? Have you done this before? All right, you've probably heard this before, but I'm going to take 2 photos. I'm going to count to 3 both times. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, it's a big deal. Thank you very much.
Okay, Mr. Cameron, if you'll take our next one, please.
Okay, I want to invite everybody from our dispatch department to please join me up here. Come on over.
And I'm going to wrap my... Thank you.
So Do you guys want to introduce yourselves? Let's start over here.
Yeah, my name is Emily Peak. I'm one of the communications supervisors.
My name is Marina Soto. I'm a communication specialist.
My name is Sarah Gallegos, and I'm a communication specialist.
Billie Jean Davidson.
Bree Sampson.
Quincy Frank. Molly Maber.
Russ Bowers.
Okay, so today it is my privilege to present the National Public Safety Telecommunications Week. Normally when you call 911, you're calling because you're in really one of the most stressful times that you're facing. And when you call, you're at the other end of the line. We're fortunate that we have someone that's very calm in the midst of all, the tragic events that the person's going through. I think sometimes we take for granted the work that all of these folks over here do. I've had the privilege of touring the dispatch facilities, and had I never done that before, I don't think I would ever understand the complexity of the job. Not only are they talking to someone that's in a lot of distress, so there's kind of that psychological aspect of keeping calm and helping that person stay calm, but their multitasking ability, it's amazing. They have how many screens? 2, couple, 1? I don't know. It seems like a lot of buttons. I don't know, but it's very confusing. I couldn't do it, and I think we're so fortunate to not only have, I think, one of the best teams in the state of Colorado. And I don't know if there's anything you want to say, anything you guys want to say to add to this.
I would just concur. It's the most professional team I've worked with in 26 years, and these people live this job. They love it, and they're consummate professionals.
Yes, and I think, normally they don't get the credit they deserve because they're not at the scene, but they deserve way more credit than I think it's given to them, because without them, I think we would have many cases and many victims that would not have gotten the care and support that they have gotten because of the work that you guys do. So without further ado, I'm going to read the proclamation. Whereas each day, thousands of Americans dial 911 for help in emergencies, the men and women who answer these calls for help, gathering essential information and dispatching the appropriate assistance, can often make the difference between life and death for persons in need. Our Westminster public safety dispatchers are among the more than 200,000 telecommunications specialists who work daily to protect and to promote public safety. And whereas the public safety telecommunicators are more than a calm and reassuring voice at the other end of the phone, they're knowledgeable and highly trained individuals who not only work closely with the police and fire departments, but numerous other state and local agencies, as well as our streets, parks, and utility divisions. Because emergencies can strike at any time, we rely on the vigilance and the preparedness of these individuals 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And whereas the City of Westminster recognizes the need to maintain the highest standards of public safety, we owe a great debt to the men and women who, by applying their experience in telecommunications, help to make that achievement possible. During this special observance, we acknowledge that debt and extend a heartfelt thanks to each of them. Now, therefore, I, Herb Atchison, Mayor, on behalf of the entire City Council and staff, do hereby proclaim the week of April 8th through 14th of 2018 as National Public Safety Telecommunicators Week in the City of Westminster, and join in honoring the men and women whose diligence and professionalism keep our city and its citizens safe. So please join me in thanking them for everything. I think we're going to get closer so we can do a picture. Got it?
Oh, yeah, we got it. Okay, I'll take 2 pictures. Count to 3 each time. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
Thank you very much. Thank you. What you guys do is impressive. Thank you. So thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate your work.
Thank you, Council. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now you don't leave me.
All right, thank you everyone for coming tonight. We appreciate all the groups that were honored tonight, especially our volunteers and our dispatch people who serve the city on a daily basis. The next item on the agenda is city communication. This is a period of time where the city council will sit and listen to issues that you may have that you want to bring before the city council. You have a period of up to 5 minutes per person. You may speak on any item that is not scheduled for a public hearing, and tonight we have no public hearing scheduled, so everything you want to bring forward is fine. I do not have anybody who signed up in the back, but to make sure if there's anyone in the audience who forgot to sign up would like to come forward this time, the floor is now open. Okay. Next item is report of officials. Mr. Tripp.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just 2 items. First of all, some people in the community have expressed concern about the temporary closing of the Harris Park Post Office, and I just want to point out that we have posted some information on the city's website concerning the temporary closure of the post office, and at your direction, we have been working to contact the Postal Service. I've sent them a letter expressing our interest in making sure that post office gets reopened. You approved a letter tonight to send to our congressional delegation, and we're keeping the pressure on to make sure that we've got good information, good communication from them. So we thank residents of the community who have expressed a concern and interest in that. It's helped us make those contacts and know that we've got your support in so doing. The second item is our post meeting tonight includes really a great treat, I'd say, because every 2 years biannually we do a citizen satisfaction survey, and we'll be going into the boardroom afterwards, and we'll have a presentation on the results of that survey. It's an instrument that we use and have used for, I believe, over 20 years, every other year, that gives our citizens a chance to tell us what they think about the performance of their local government and the services that we provide, and provide us feedback. It's very important to us as we do strategic planning, establish our budgets, and we're going to report the results of that survey tonight, and then it will be later posted on our city's website. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tripp. Council, any comments from you at this time? Mr. Camber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to take a moment to thank our volunteers for everything that they do for this city. You know, we heard of the different types of volunteering opportunities and work that the different members of our community do. And I just want to say that not only do they benefit the city financially, because we do save a lot of money, but also it's really that contact with the community that I think really makes a difference. You know, a couple of the members that were here today talked about how they do English classes. You know, the mother of one of my friends who's from Spain actually goes to the classes, and it amazes me, and it really excites me to hear her talk about her class. You know, she loves it. Going to those classes not only allow her to, you know, learn English and better integrate with our community, but it's also the first contact she's really had with any services of our city. And it's really exciting to see that. Second, you know, I really want to take a moment to thank, you know, our colleague, Councilwoman Anita Seitz, for the work that she has done to make us be part of the Start by Believing campaign. You know, the issue of ending, you know, sexual assault or any type of inappropriate behavior with people in our community, it's something that I think this council supports. That being said, I think because of her diligence, her passion, and her commitment, she has pushed us to not only be supportive, but to be leaders on such an important issue, especially in this day and age. So I really want to thank her for helping Westminster be leaders on this issue, and for continuing to make sure that we highlight this issue in our community. Thank you.
Any other comments from council? Ms. Scully, we have a special visitor in the audience tonight. Maybe you'd take a moment to introduce her.
I would be honored, Mr. Mayor. So, Julia, would you stand up? This is Julia. Julia is from Germany. She is a student exchange student with our Stanley Lake High School GAP program, and she is staying with our family for 2.5 weeks. And then there will be an American that will go to Germany and stay with her for the month of June, or a couple of weeks in June, and then they travel around Germany. So it's a great program. I understand Bear Creek and Stanley Lake are the only 2 Jefferson County schools that have this program. And I'm trying to show off America to her. So.
Thank you. Julia, welcome. Appreciate you being here. Next item on the agenda is the City, if anyone else yours come up, go ahead. Okay. All right, if there's no other council agenda, this is items that are scheduled for a single motion. We did have some time before the pre-meeting to see if there was any items that were to be removed from the consent agenda, and I don't know that we have any to be removed. None? Okay. Mr. DeMott, if you would then, please.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve the consent agenda A through G, move the city council up those items.
Okay, I have a motion. Ms. Scully?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please signify. I'm sorry. Greg Cumming. Okay, all those in favor, please vote with your lights. You had a comment? I'm sorry.
That's okay. Well, I just wanted to call the public's attention to 3 projects that we're going to be approving tonight that are part of the consent agenda. And it's something I'm very proud of. We're making substantial investments in our water and sewer infrastructure. I know we see this as we drive throughout many parts of our city, but this is our chance to kind of recognize why we do this. As a consumer, I think too often we take safe, reliable, high-quality drinking water for granted. And I have to tell you, during my 2+ years of experience on City Council, I know that that's not true. High-quality, safe water doesn't just happen by accident. It happens because a city invests. We have professionals who understand take raw water from all of our traditional sources that we don't often think about and turn it into something that's safe for you to use. So what I think is exceptional about our city is the concern that we have for the quality of this water, making sure that we keep up with our infrastructure, and not only we care about what's happening today, but that we are being good stewards of our resources and making sure that we are investing in our citizens for tomorrow and what Westminster is going to look like in the decades to come. So this is kudos to our staff. I want to thank you for your professionalism and leadership on this. Really, this is core to our daily lives. So thank you for all you do, and I'm looking forward to voting yes on this.
Are there any other comments from council before we move to the vote? All those in favor, go by your votes. And the motion carries on a 7-0 vote. The next item on their agenda will be item 10A. And if I can get a motion, Ms. Bird, to start us.
Yes, I move to waive the city code requirement for underground relocations of the existing overhead utility line along the eastern property line of the Laurel Business Park subdivision, lots 1 and 2.
Scully?
Second.
Okay. Is there any comments or questions from council on this item? Ms. Bird?
Yes. I guess I just would like to start off with a little bit of background. So we're being asked to waive a code requirement to underground some currently existing overhead utility lines. And I was hopeful that you could give us some background about why we do this. Why do we underground in the first place, and why do we have a code that tells us to do this?
Certainly. Is this working? Certainly. Dave Downing, Director of Community Development for the city. So again, the action requested by council tonight is to waive a municipal code requirement that all new developments in the city underground relocate existing overhead utility lines that abut or cross the subject property to be developed. The municipal code also includes a opportunity for council to grant waivers for that requirement if it is determined that undergrounding any particular line represents an undue hardship for the developer. Now, I can tell you this from, of course, this portion of the code was enacted in 1997, and I was right in the middle of drafting that that code requirement at that time when I was city engineer. And I can tell you that we consulted with our representatives from Xcel Energy as we drafted that code, and those experts told us, don't try to list every potential condition which it might be very difficult or even impossible to underground an existing overhead line, just make sure you give council the opportunity to waive it if it's deemed to be an undue hardship, and that's exactly what we did. There's over time I found there's all sorts of reasons why it's impractical or impossible to underground certain size voltage lines, the location of lines, that sort of thing. And as it has turned out, very few times have we had to approach council to ask for such a waiver. And I'm pretty sure I know why it's been that way throughout the end of the 1990s and into the 2000s. You know, most of our development was greenfield type development where abutting overhead lines were along public streets, and it was relatively simple to underground the overhead lines in those instances. In more recent years, council's finding, staff and council are finding that there's a lot of infill development going on, and the scenarios change quite dramatically when you're talking about infill development. And in the case of this Laurel Business Park, the subject property we're talking about tonight, is one of those instances where the line in question is along the back side, in this case the east side of the property, abutting a subdivision. Now, again, getting back to what our expert Maxell warned us about back in 1997, one of those conditions where it becomes very impractical to underground an overhead line is when services to houses attached to the line in question. And that's the case here. We have 11 residential lots that abut the proposed development site. So 11 separate service lines running off what I call the main line to the houses. It's not straightforward to simply underground a service line to a house, especially houses that were built. I think we determined that the plat for the adjacent subdivision was platted in 1955. As you might imagine, electrical codes have been amended several times since 1955, and the result is frequently that if an underground service runs right to the house, the electrical panel on the side of the house has to be replaced, and that opens up a whole can of worms, because if in the case of older subdivisions, if wiring is not in accordance with the more modern standards, the whole house has to be rewired. One way around having to do that is to run the underground service line from the now undergrounded main line to a pole in the yards of the individual residences, and then up the pole overhead to the existing panel, and that doesn't require the panel or the wiring in the house to be replaced. Furthermore, though, it also sort of defeats the purpose of the undergrounding requirement in the first place. I can vividly recall that the intent back in 1997 was to beautify the streetscapes along these new developments so that you didn't have to, the front-facing door of new developments wouldn't have overhead lines. If we have to underground service lines to a pole adjacent to the houses, you're simply replacing the poles for the main line with poles in the backyards of, in this case, 11 different residences. I believe I heard there were questions about cost involved. I'll try to address that. Our estimate of the cost for undergrounding the main line running along the property line of the proposed development, is about $250,000. That's pretty high for development of this size, but then the additional cost of undergrounding the service lines, I believe we said was another $80,000 if the panels didn't have to be replaced, if the houses themselves didn't have to be rewired. Well, we haven't inspected every house to determine whether that would be necessary, but again, vintage 1955, it would be my strong expectation that you would have to certainly replace the panels and probably rewire the houses, and we don't know what the cost nor the inconvenience of such an action would be. If you can remind me of other specific questions.
Ms. Burke, go ahead.
Yeah, I have others. So I guess where I was wanting to know specifically with the undergrounding, so is this purely for aesthetics, or is there a safety, health reason that we would do this also?
So it was, I can tell you it was enacted because of the aesthetic enhancements that undergrounding would offer for the city. So far as safety, it's really not. It really hasn't been a consideration. I mean, we could all envision scenarios where underground electric lines could be dangerous also if you're digging and don't know that they're there. So really, I don't recall any conversations among city staff or council back in that time where safety was the concern. It's really an aesthetic consideration.
And I guess I have heard from citizens who live in this part of our city that having more of the overhead utilities is an issue for them. They'd like to see more of this be put underground.
Absolutely.
So if council were to waive the requirement for this tonight, when would these utilities ever be undergrounded?
This particular line? Probably never, honestly. It would be, once the new development goes in, it would become even more expensive to do so, and I would venture that it probably wouldn't be done in a very long time.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly.
Mr. Canberra.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Downing, so you mentioned that so the homes were built in 1955, is that correct?
It was platted in 1955, so probably between 55 and 60 the houses were built.
Is that when the service lines were built?
Correct.
So what is the life of a service line?
Thank you for giving us that heads up. We had time to run upstairs and that's great. We were actually able to find the answer to that question, and I believe it's 80 years. 80 years is the expected life of an overhead line.
And what's the difference? Do you know the difference of the life of it underground?
Actually, we do. And don't ask me to explain, but it's much less. It's 40 years for an undergrounded line and 80 years for an overhead line.
So what percentage, and I didn't include this question, so my apologies, you just made me think of it now.
Sure.
What percentage of our city would you say it's underground versus overground?
My very rough guess in area would be a third overhead and 2/3 underground, and that's because gosh, probably even prior to 1997, whenever XL puts in lines, they've been going underground for new developments. I mean, any special projects that XL would do. But that would be my rough guess, is a third overhead and 2/3 underground, but that's a rough guess.
So if it's a matter of newer development versus older, then would it be safe to say that the majority of the overground service lines are in this part of the city then?
Overhead? Most of the overhead are in, yes.
In this part of the city?
In this portion of the city, correct.
So, so what is the cost difference between, so I understand it's about $250,000
for the main line.
For them to do it. What if the city were to do the 11 homes, or work with them to do the 11 homes, and that the the owner does the rest?
Okay, to answer your, first I'll answer
Yeah.
your specific question. Again, making some really gross assumptions that are probably not accurate.
Yeah.
Is going to be a minimum of $80,000, $80,000, but likely to be much more than that, much more than
For
that.
the city.
For the city, because again, it would be our anticipation that we would have to rewire houses. So I don't know how you put a price tag on telling someone that they have to move out of their house for a few days, several days. I just don't know how you do it. I couldn't even begin to estimate that kind of cost. Now, if you would allow me, one other further piece of information talking about this and our inconsistency. Please be advised that, again, I told you there's only been a handful of cases that we can remember where we've had to ask council to waive the undergrounding requirement. The most recent was less than a year ago for a project immediately south of 74th, very close to this, in very identical equation as this one, undergrounding requirement, for the same reasons that we're proposing that this project, the requirement be waived also.
Yeah, I was reminded of that after I brought that up at the pre-council meeting. So to make sure I understood correctly, well, actually, before I ask this last question, you touched on this you talked a bit about why you do not recommend only approving everything except doing the 11 homes. Can you expand a little bit more on that? Like, why is that something that staff doesn't recommend?
Why we don't recommend that line? Again, it's the unusual cost, and actually I should say the unknown cost of getting into burying the service lines. If council were to decide that undergrounding the main line, but installing poles in the backyards of all 11 lots and running the service line from the newly undergrounded main line underground to the pole, up pole, and then aerial to the on the side of the house, that's an option. That's an option. I think that's a good option though, because again, remember that the intent of the whole program is aesthetics. We don't think that it's really defeating the purpose by having new poles in people's backyards and an overhead line running to the house anyway. Okay. If you've traveled along Bradburn between 73rd and 77th Avenue, where the street lighting program has occurred recently, you'll see the scenario I'm talking about. We had to do just what I'm talking about. That is, the main line along the street edge was placed underground. There's still poles in people's side yards with the service line running from the pole to the house, and it's not an optimal situation. It does improve the street frontage itself, but again, I think in this case we're thinking that it's really an undue hardship for this developer.
So thank you very much for all of that.
Certainly.
My last question is, it's not a question, it's more of a clarification that I need. So I just want to make sure that I understood correctly. So what you mentioned to Councilor Byrd is that essentially the need for underground service lines, it's not a matter of safety, it's because of a matter of the
aesthetics.
Yes,
ma'am.
Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm looking at my other aged expert over here, and he says that's correct. We feel that it's really aesthetics and not so much safety.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. That's all I
yes,
have.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Penter.
Thank you, Mr. Downing. I had similar questions, and in your statements, you covered a lot of my preliminary questions. And so I'm just really left and I understand where you're coming from with this particular developer, but at what point would undergrounding happen? And you had said to Councilor Byrd, never. But in doing the math, assuming this was done in 1960, 58 years in on this line, assuming an 80-year life, we have 22 years left on these lines before they need to be replaced, if the 80-year math is accurate.
Correct.
If that's the case, what would be the chance for undergrounding lines at that point?
Well, if the 80-year assumption is correct, the service lines, that would mean the service lines need to be replaced, and I would expect that they would be replaced from overhead to overhead situation. But your question is, could we underground at that point in time when the lines need to be replaced?
Right. If we're doing, if a replacement is being done in, based on our 80-year assumption and being built in 1960, that's about 22 years-ish. They'll need to be replaced.
It could be done, but my prediction would be at 22 years from now, we'd be having the same discussion about does the panel need to be replaced? Probably very much so by time. Does the house need to be rewired? Do people have to move out of their houses for several days or weeks while their house is rewired? It's hard to imagine a scenario where that would be practical.
Okay, so that'll make sense, and I understand where you're coming from and why this appears to be an undue hardship on this developer. But it, for me, raises a question. If undergrounding the lines was necessary for the beautification of newer neighborhoods up north, why is it not necessary for the beautification of these neighborhoods too?
The whole difference is the existence of the service lines coming off the main line.
Making it impractical.
Correct. That's the entire difference.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Seitz?
Thank you so much. Full disclosure, I lived in a 1950s ranch in Denver that had one of the lines that went to our house. So I have lived in that circumstance. And I would have had a strong preference to underground it, but also recognize it sounds somewhat impractical. My question to you, and maybe it comes from that bias, having been a homeowner in a similar situation, was did we reach out to those 11 residents to see what their preference was?
My understanding from the consultants on the project that question was raised during the neighborhood meeting. Keep in mind that that's not a meeting run by city staff, but by the developer and his consultants. My understanding was that the question was raised and people really did not voice an opinion on the matter.
Okay.
By hearsay information.
Okay.
My guess would be at that point in time, there was about the cost and the inconvenience and what that entailed to underground the lines.
Or that it was most likely a requirement
Correct.
from the city, either.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. It seems like their voice would be valuable in helping make this determination. So it sounds like, and I really appreciated the earlier question, understanding the intent of this ordinance was really a beautification.
Yes, ma'am.
And it seems like in this situation, if I'm understanding it, it's on the east side, so these lines will be obscured by the development. Is that true?
That's my opinion.
Okay. So that intent isn't as valuable in this situation. But from beyond the intent from the original ordinance, is there increased reliability and safety in undergrounding because you have limbs? I believe the mayor of Wheat Ridge's home burned down in a similar situation from a line.
That's correct. Yes, ma'am. From a discussion a few years ago with Preston Gibson of XL Energy, yeah, he verified to me that it's less likely that outages occur when lines are properly undergrounded. I think the reason you have outages usually isn't so much rain or snow as it is wind blowing lines together and causing them to short out, which of course would not happen if they were placed underground. Again, though, you heard my earlier testimony about the life of an underground line versus overhead line. Hard to believe, but that's what we've found during our quick research tonight.
Okay. Well, yeah, that was surprising. And so we did pass a variance last year.
That's correct.
For a similar reason. My understanding that was also on the...
That's right. It was in May of last year. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. You know, this is a part of town that we do like to see economic investment coming into. And I appreciate, I mean, $80,000 just really scratching the surface because each house potentially could be rewired. I recognize that's a large price tag. Can I ask a question that I didn't prep you guys for before? And if you don't have the answer, I understand.
Sure.
What is the average lifespan of the wiring of a home? How frequently is a home? I mean,
wouldn't have the slightest idea.
Okay,
sorry.
Thank you. I just didn't know had the homes most likely already been rewired due to their age.
If I may add one more thing also, I think if I use the term 1% fund, does everybody understand? Real quickly, the 1% fund is part of the franchise agreement between the city and Xcel Energy, in which 1% of the revenue generated by the company within the city is held for the city's use in directing where the underground relocation of existing overhead lines should occur. That's significant money these days. Dave, remind me how much we get per year for in the 1% fund? Yeah, but how much do we get per year? Do you remember? I think it's getting close to $1 million a year, if I'm not mistaken, or somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million a year. That's the good news. The bad news is undergrounding projects are tremendously expensive. But here's the point I wanted to make for you. Again, because of that 1/3, 2/3 split, the answer to the question earlier about where overhead lines are located, obviously our 1% fund projects are targeted for that portion of the city where we have the overhead lines. So, and staff is pretty diligent about making sure that our 1% projects occur in those areas.
Thank you
Certainly.
so much.
Certainly.
Mr. DeMott?
I have a couple quick questions. Since you brought up the 1% fund, because that wasn't on my list, but you brought it up. So
sure.
How do you, when something like this comes up, how do you decide whether or not you're going to pull those funds for such a project, or how do they go through that process? Or did this one go through that process, I guess?
Not through the process of consideration for 1% funds. It's from personal experience, I can tell you, the biggest problem with 1% fund projects is they take a long time to plan, design, and implement. You know, when we hear about a proposed development, there's just not that much time to be allowable for us to work with Xcel to use 1% funds for that purpose. So we have to target projects well in advance to get them on the list for 1% funding. Are you asking how do we determine which projects?
I think that kind of gets to my point. So there's a lot more red tape, so a lot more planning.
Absolutely, like yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's something you can't really do on the spur of the moment.
So I had two other questions that didn't get answered because most of the ones that I had sent ahead of time got answered, but you kind of spurred a couple other that are in the same line. Have we had projects like this before that impacted homes that we did not provide waiver, where we made them bury and they actually had to go through that whole process?
And arranging for the burial of the service lines, but again, for an overhead line from that pole to the side of the house.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry for my...
No, that's okay.
Electricity is not my strength, but I'm
Mine
working
neither.
on it.
Okay. Other comments by council? Okay. Mr. Downing, don't leave.
Okay.
One of the things that we have not talked about only on that pole is their electrical power, telecommunications. So every telecom company that has wires on there would also have contracted to replace those lines. The question was asked by one of you about rewiring houses. Houses typically, unless there's a major problem, don't get rewired because of the age of wiring. We have houses in the city that are still wired with aluminum wiring from back in the 50s, the 40s, that are still operational today. If you want a house that's existing today, picture any one room in your house, probably the living room being the biggest one. And you have outlets about every 12 to 16 feet apart. So between those two outlets, you have to open up the wall and pull new wiring to get between them. So that means every wall in every room of the house is going to get cut up, whether it's plaster, lath and plaster, or sheetrock, depending on what age of the house and how it was finished. That's part of what Dave was talking about, is we don't know how much damage that's going to cost. Now, once you go in and start that, then you're required to bring the entire house up to current code. That means the houses that don't have GFI circuits are going to have them. Breaker panels that don't have GFI circuits are going to have to be changed. The type of wiring that's done in the bedrooms today is different than it was 20 years ago because they changed the code. Every 4 years, the code changes. I don't think we've heard one person that's here, not the developer, but the homeowners, that says they want to have that kind of damage done to their homes in order to accommodate taking down some power poles that are in their backyards. Because this is a very big deal if you start taking, and we don't know that anyone's going to agree to go do that to their home. We're not asking them. I'm very uncomfortable with the conversation saying that we're thinking about having people go have this disruption in their homes. Dave pointed out earlier is that changing the service panels is one thing. But once you start that service project, and I'm speaking from an area of expertise that I have as a master electrician, this is not some simple. It is very disruptive to the home. And while that's being done, they are likely not to have power in those homes. So some places they're going to have to go stay. So going in, identifying it, opening it up, ripping it out, replacing it, repairing all that work that's in those houses, as Mr. Losman both sitting over nodding their heads, this is not some cheap piece of work that you're talking about, much less the interest to the homeowners. Taking from what we have today of 4 or 5 poles to potentially 11 poles is not meeting the aesthetic part that they've been talking about. We just doubled the number of poles, if not more than doubled. To Ms. Scully's question, it is not the developer that does that work. It's Excel Energy, because they own those power lines and they own those poles. Also, that any change would be if we have Comcast and we have CenturyLink both on those poles, which many of them do, then both of those companies also have to come out and do all that work. And again, if we're back to making a single drop to a house, you are probably looking also at potential roof repairs if we have to go total underground all the way to the box that's on the side of the house. Because then, as you look in the overhead service today, there's a mast, very much like a ship, where the overhead power comes from the pole into the house. That mast extends through the roof in many cases so that it gets the extra structural support of that weight of that line going from the main line into the house. All of those things keep adding up. We don't have a clean thing. This thing sort of dominoes and gets bigger and bigger as you go down. That's talking about what's going to go on. But again, I think what we looked at is very much similar to what we did last year. Is this a real issue that we're trying to resolve? It's not a safety issue. Those lines may or may not have a life expectancy of 80 years, but that doesn't mean they're going to get replaced in 80 years. If they're still functional, why would Excel or anybody else, United Power, go in and replace them? If they fail, they'll go replace them even sooner. But the fact that they're in the air saves the line, making the life expectancy much longer because of the heating issue. Burying it creates a heating issue in the ground, that not being able to disperse the heat off those lines. In the free air, that heat gets dispersed. That's one reason they don't put it in conduit. They use the ground to help cool part of it, but free air is where the least amount of damage comes to those. So those are some of the things that we as a council are getting in the weeds on of trying to figure out where we're going to go tear up somebody's house, and I very much am not in favor of doing that. Ms. Bird, you had another comment.
I was just going to say this is a hard issue because I think there's a strong desire on our council to want to invest and do everything we can to be investing in maintaining vibrancy of all parts of our city, and where there's an opportunity to make change from previously adopted practices to bring things more modern and more aesthetically pleasing. I know I'm looking for every opportunity to do that. So that makes this kind of hard, but to me, if there really is no aesthetic benefit at the end of the day by doing this, which was the intent of this code provision in the first place, and then we have the opportunity of multiplying the number of poles in so doing, and then imposing sounds like a pretty significant burden upon the homeowners who would be affected by what we would be trying to argue was an improvement, which sounds like perhaps it's not an improvement. It sounds like we're not complying with the spirit of what we really were trying to set out to do. So I'll be, I guess, voting to support staff's recommendation on this. So, thank
Ms.
you.
Seitz, you have a comment?
Yeah, I just want to say I also will be voting to support staff's recommendation. I think it is wonderful to have the historic knowledge here to understand the intent of this ordinance, and it sounds like any aesthetic benefit of undergrounding this would be limited at best due to their placement behind the development. And again, this is an example we can help development happen in a part of our town that we will see revitalization in by simply cutting some red tape. My one but is that I feel like when we are waiving a requirement that may improve residences, I would like us to reach out to the residents to see what their feelings are on the issue, because I do agree that this is an undue burden on the developer. I would like to at least have those conversations in the future with the residents that are affected.
So noted.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Other comments from council? Mr. Cameron?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And, I think, this is a part of our city where our residents are actively and constantly ask us to support them in revitalizing the area. And where I worry with this is that I don't necessarily see how this development is necessarily going to revitalize that area. And I worry that by supporting this, we're going to say yes to the status quo. A lot of our residents have expressed, we want you to invest here. We want you to help us to improve this area. And I worry that now we're going to support a development that for at least over 30 years will continue to be that way. That it will continue to be above ground and not underground. So today I'm actually, which I think will be surprising because I'm always very supportive of staff recommendations, but I'm going to have to be a no vote because I just don't feel like this development itself merits to have this to be supportive. So thank you.
Ms. Pinter?
I have to agree with Mayor Pro Tem DeCambra on this issue. While I understand what's some of the concerns and the complexities with undergrounding, if we are to make this waiver, I think we have to at some point start making the waivers for development that we would like to incent and development that we'd like to encourage, and something that's a unique step forward and not a preservation of status quo. And I would be concerned with this specific project just being the status quo.
Ms. Scully?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to echo what Councilor Bird and Councilor Seitz said. They each said something very important that is coming to my consideration, which is that this doesn't seem to actually be improving the aesthetics. It actually seems to be muddying it more. I don't want to put a burden on residents later or now to have to pay for something extra to their homes. And but I'm concerned that we really didn't go to the residents directly and talk to them a little bit about what would their preference be. I'm kind of confused as to why they're not here tonight to discuss this with us as well. I mean, this directly impacts their yards, their homes, their livelihood. And I'm concerned that this isn't an area of town that it is an older area. It does have these issues, and we can't seem to help this area become more aesthetically pleasing and an area that everyone wants to live in. That concerns me because it is a beautiful area of town. I lived in that area of town, and I loved it. And I'm just sad that we can't bring the residents more to us to have these discussions. So that is my concern as well. But I will be voting yes on the waiver.
Any other comments from council? We have a motion and a second in support of the motion. This is a vote with your buttons, so please vote. Okay, the motion passes on a 5-2 vote. Next item on the agenda is Councilor's Bill number 17. Ms. Seitz.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move to pass Councilor Bills number 17 on first reading, amending Chapter 1 of Title 13 and repealing Section 13-5-6 of the Westminster Municipal Code to comply with current law and practice.
Ms. Byrd.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on Councilor's Bill number 17? Ms. Seitz?
I just want to thank everyone involved. I think this was a very thorough audit of our code and really brought us up to speed. So thank you to our city attorney and to our Parks and Recs.
Any other comments from council? Seeing none, this is a roll call vote. Ms. Parker?
Atchison.
Yes.
Byrd.
Yes.
DeCambra.
Yes.
DeMont.
Yes.
Pinter.
Yes.
Seitz.
Yes.
Scully.
Yes.
Motion carries on a 7-0 vote. Next item on the agenda is move to pass Councilor's Bill number 4, second reading. If there is a motion, get to that. Come on. Okay, Ms. Pinter.
Move to pass Councilor's Bill number 4 on second reading, authorizing the city manager to execute and implement an economic development agreement with Dynamis Partners, LLC, doing business as Westminster Square Shopping Center that would include rebates of 50% of total sales tax generated by the businesses located at 3001 through 3055 West 74th Avenue to be improvements to the property in an amount not to exceed $418,128.
Ms. Byrd.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any other discussion by council? Seeing none, Ms. Parker, this is a roll call vote.
Byrd.
Yes.
DeCambra.
Yes.
DeMont.
Yes.
Pinter.
Yes.
Seitz.
No.
Scully.
Yes.
Atchison.
Yes, Lord. Motion carries on a 6-1 vote. Next item on the agenda is Council Bill number 15.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move to pass Councilor's Bill number 15 on second reading, authorizing the manager to execute and implement an economic agreement with Ball Aerospace and Technologies.
Ms. Scully.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion by council? Ms. Seitz?
I just want to let the audience know that I will be recusing myself from this vote as my husband has worked for, his company has worked for Ball in the past.
Okay. Any other comments by council? Okay. This will be a roll call vote as well with one abstention. Ms. Parker?
DeCambra.
Yes.
DeMont.
Yes.
Pinter.
Yes.
Seitz.
Abstain.
Scully.
Yes.
Atchison.
Yes.
Byrd.
Yes.
Motion carries on a 6-0 vote with one abstention. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the business of the City Council. At this time, we have one open item for the presentation on the Westminster Citizen Survey, and then after that, we have an executive session on economic development items. It's approximately 5 minutes till 9. I'll give everyone till 5 after 9, and then we'll convene back in the council chambers.